This episode is sponsored by Amino Complete RX, pharmaceutical grade powdered collagen plus aminos. This is one of my favorite products. It's something I recommend to all of my friends and family, and it's something that I've recommended to clients for years. Anyone that's ever told me, anyone that tells me they've been having a rough go of things, they're not in they're not having a good space. Things haven't been going great. They're trying to get in a better habit, a better routine, just trying to get things going together in their lives. This is always the first place that I get them going. So look for it on our website. We'll have the link up on this episode page, and become a member. If you become a member, you get discounts immediately. So membership is the key to immediate discounts and to supporting our podcast. And with that, here's our first guest. Enjoy the episode.
If you listen closely, you can hear the voices.
I can hear them whisper their legacy to you. Go on, lean in.
From somewhere deep inside the evergreen forests of the Pacific Northwest. Everything you know is wrong.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
With Jeremy Horn.
You're an inhuman monster. I said good day.
And with that, let's get to our first guest. When we first launched this podcast, we wanted to convey from the very first episode our mission to engage in informative dialogue with thoughtful and accomplished guests. And I knew right away who I wanted to be as our first guest. Dr. Joiner-Bey is an author, a consultant, a doctor of naturopathic medicine, as well as an adjunct professor at Bastyr University. He's an educator. He's a lecturer. He holds degrees in physics and mathematics from John Hopkins University. And unfortunately for him, he's also my friend. So he has to deal with that burden. Herb and I can talk for hours, and every time we talk, I learn something new thanks to his vast base of knowledge and wonderful perspective. And I think he invariably learns something new from me every time we talk, simply on the basis that I'm incapable of shutting my dumb trap. I talk at people so much that they can't help but allow something to sink in once in a while. That's my tactic, I guess. That's my MO. But when Herb and I get together, we like to play a game where we solve all the world's problems. So this podcast has very little structure and is more of a way of sharing with people our little game. So if you want the world to be a better place like we do, please feel free to send us tools, practices, lessons, stories, suggestions, any ideas or any practices that you do in your daily life, anything else that you use to live a better life or make better sense of the world we live in. By all means, share with us, let us know what you do and how we could fit it into our own lives, and all of us can grow as people. So with that, enjoy the episode. Well, Herb, welcome to the Treetop Tavern. What do you think?
I think it's fabulous. This is really a spectacular place.
Pretty unique, right?
Very unique.
Yeah. This is exciting. I'm not sure if you realize this, but you are officially our first guest.
I understand that. I greatly appreciate the honor.
That's right.
Thank
We
you
didn't
very
talk
much.
about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Very intentionally, is because we wanted to kind of set the tone for the kind of conversations we want to have here and the kind of minds that we want to engage with. And so you're the first one that came to mind. Friend of mine, you're brilliant. Every time we talk, I have a blast. It's always a thrill. You always teach me something new. So
you're very kind. I hope we don't shake things up.
Disappoint
too much
everyone right off the bat.
It goes downhill from here.
Yeah, it's already. So a couple things. One, the name of the podcast, as you know, is Everything You Know Is Wrong. And because we live, unfortunately, in an age not only of information, but misinformation. And misinformation travels so much faster. Right. And ideas get disseminated before they've been validated, before they've been vetted, and they're just out there. And I read recently that there's, the famous thing that a lot of people always talk about, how with kids that are struggling in school, parents always say, well, you'll be fine because Einstein failed math. You've heard that, right?
Yes,
right?
Absolutely.
So it's like an old wives' tale that everybody's heard. I didn't know that started while Einstein was still alive. Right?
Yes.
And because we didn't live in an age of technology where he could just send a tweet, be like, yeah, this is not true. This is nonsense.
Exactly.
We just split an atom. You know that, right?
Right.
So even he, during his lifetime, was like, why do people keep saying that?
I know.
That's nonsense. Even in his own time, right? So now with so much information getting put out there, so much misinformation gets kicked right back out. So now I feel like there's even more of a responsibility to...
There's one little problem. David Brooks has said this on the NewsHour a couple of weeks ago. They're finding that when fact checkers challenge what politicians are saying, for those people who want to believe the politician, the incorrect factoid goes deeper into their minds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So fact checking doesn't work because just the fact that the fact checker pointed out that fact, it becomes more deeply ingrained in how the person thinks.
Yeah.
It's just unfortunate. That's how people are. That's how their minds respond.
Yeah.
So it takes such We have so many things that are driven into our subconscious way of thinking that's hard for us, unless we really are very rigorous, to dig that stuff out, challenge it, and turn it around.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example that's really shocking. There's a guy named Tim Wise, who's probably this country's leading European American speaking about anti-African racism in this country. And he knew a woman who a white woman spent her entire life speaking on the issue of anti-African racism, her whole life fighting anti-African racism. Well, now she's in her old age, and now she's coming down with senile dementia. Because of the disintegration of her cerebral cortex function, all the limbic stuff coming up, the emotional stuff is coming up, and now she's directing racial epithets at the African-American women who are helping her in the nursing home. Oh. She spent her whole life fighting this, but because the culture is so deeply ingrained in us, all this racist belief system, now it's coming up in her, even though she spent her whole life fighting it. That's how deeply ingrained false ideas and false concepts are.
Yeah.
I call it cultural lies. We grew up with cultural lies about racial superiority, gender superiority, all kinds of issues where we put other people down to relative to ourselves. And once you start engaging these, as we've had this very conversation, one of the most important things a person can do in his or her life, and Krishnamurti talked about this, the famous Indian philosopher, the great souls of history always realized at a certain point in their lives that their minds were culturally conditioned to believe things that weren't true. And they spent the rest of their lives trying to undo that conditioning.
Yeah.
That's the only way to get free of it. But even then, after all this effort, you still may not be free.
Yeah. You want to hear something nuts? That's exactly it. How do you get free? I have so many clients of mine living here in the Pacific Northwest that are brilliant engineers from all over the world, come to Microsoft, Boeing, Costco, Amazon, right? We harvest the best engineers on the planet right here in our backyard. So I get all these clients that are Indian, Asian, Mediterranean, right? And they come here and they come to me and say, they come to me because they're 30 pounds overweight, they're having trouble focus, they're losing hair, they're stressed out. So I ask them a few questions that have nothing to do with health. I go, so how long have you lived in India or Cyprus or wherever you're from, right? And they'll be like, man, 35 years. How long have you been living in the U.S.? 4 years. And how long have you been gaining weight? 4 years. It took you 4 years to become an American, right?
Right.
I go, how often do you eat Indian food? They're like, when you were in India. They're like, oh yeah, 3 times a day, 7 days a week. How often do you eat in the U.S.? My wife makes it like a couple times a week. Is that alarming to you? You know what I mean? And I'm telling this to someone.
So they abandoned their own diet and lifestyle
to become American because our culture is so pervasive, right? Well, and exactly. And every time I show them, I just show them the mirror and I go, this is not me trying to convince you of an Indian way of life. You are Indian, you know. And I have to do this with my own family is because family members, you know what I mean? Or friends of family will come to the U.S. and start eating KFC and developing health problems. And we're like, well, you notice how nobody in our family has cholesterol problems? Right. Nobody Asians don't have high cholesterol in anywhere the rates in the U.S., right?
Correct.
Well, nobody coughs on Asians on the plane over here and gives them high cholesterol. No, obviously, there's a philosophical change, right? No. So I go, there's nobody in our family with high cholesterol except for these 2 family members, and they're the only ones that eat fast food. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah.
It's amazing. One of the I do a lot of work in terms of the Paleolithic diet and the kind of work done by Dr. Dennis Burkett, who was the senior British medical officer in sub-Saharan Africa in the early part of the 20th century. And also Hugh Trowell and the very famous Dr. Weston Price, the dentist who went around the world looking at what happened when indigenous peoples were first exposed to the Western refined diet. And the information is so clear. You go through all these stages of degeneration within those cultures, those populations.
Quickly, right?
Very quickly.
Very quickly.
It happens very fast.
Yeah, that's what's alarming.
It's absolutely shocking. And what you're saying is really quite true. When you go to other parts of the world, people are eating their own indigenous food. Even in European countries, you don't see the obesity you see in this country.
Not at all.
The moment you step off the plane coming back from one of those countries, you are shocked about how relatively obese the American people are.
Yeah. And it's all people that are Indians and Europeans and Asians slim. And then they come and they get paunchy, and then they come to me to help them with weight loss. I go, weight loss is not the problem. It took you 3 years to become pure American, just absorbed by the culture. And I understand it to an extent is that like with Korean food, I don't go to a lot of Korean restaurants because I've got family members that make incredible Korean food. Right. So when I go to a restaurant, I'm almost like too judgy. I'm like, well, this could be better, as opposed to just enjoying the meal.
Exactly.
So I can see somebody from somewhere else is not going to enjoy that. But it's still, it's alarming, like you said, how quickly the body makes those shifts and changes. On a positive light, that's what you and I do, is we tell people how quickly you can change that back. It just takes deliberate effort. It takes work. It takes lifestyle changes. But the body wants to get happy again. It doesn't want to stay in that state. It wants to.
Well, see, this is something that is so important. We should something that Dr. Jeffrey Bland, this country's most distinguished nutrition biochemist, says: you eat for your genes. If you fail to do that, you're going to suffer. I mean, the way I describe it in modern terms now, every cell in your body is a remote outpost. And all it can do to survive is to depend on what comes in this direction down the bloodstream: water, oxygen, nutrients. If you fail to supply your cells with what they want, they will suffer. They'll have to burn up reserves that should be kept for old age to make sure people vital and have lots of aliveness in their senior years. But if they have to burn all that stuff up in earlier years, then automatically you're increasing the speed of aging.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is so important. Every cell is a remote outpost. Make sure those cells get exactly what they want every single day.
Yeah.
It's such an important thing. It's such a simple thing, but we don't think that way.
That's true.
We're just programmed to put in our mouths what the commercial interests want us to put in our mouths every day.
Yeah. I see friends of mine that will post pictures on social media of them eating Fruit Loops and be like, nothing better than Fruit Loops. I'm like, you have 3 children.
Yeah.
Knock it off. Fruit Loops are great, but get that for someone's birthday. It shouldn't be, you're an adult. No. Stop eating Fruit Loops every day,
So this whole discussion was about the whole issue of not believing what we've been told.
But I'm okay with Fruit Loops. That's the thing.
Yeah, right.
When I say things like that, people's initial response is, but I like Fruit Loops. I'm attacking it. I go, no, I'm not saying don't eat Fruit Loops. Fruit Loops all you want. Just don't eat it every day. That's senseless.
See, the mind's programmed to like Fruit Loops. But your cells don't want Fruit Loops.
Right,
they want something more nutritious than that. Earl Nightingale was probably this country's most distinguished motivational speaker and writer. And back in the 1950s, he prepared what became the first non-musical recording ever to sell 1 million copies.
Ooh.
It's famous. It's called The Strangest Secret. You can actually go to YouTube and just put in there. Earl Nightingale, The Strangest Secret.
What year? What time?
About 1955, 56, something like that.
Okay.
A very simple thing. It's a simple recording he did in his own studio and put it out. He wasn't expecting it to get that kind of response.
First YouTube celebrity.
Copies.
In 1955. That's crazy.
The first non-musical recording to sell 1 million copies. And the reason was that the information there was so important. The Strangest Secret. The Strangest Secret is your life was always directed by your currently dominant thoughts. But I bring that up because in the recording also made a very important statement. He was quoting someone else who said, the opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity. We are brainwashed or culture conditioned mentally to conform to what the conventional way of doing things this country happen to be. Even the conventional foods, refined flour, refined sugar, all this junk stuff that we are culturally programmed to eat. But none of this has anything to do with our health and well-being.
It takes real risk to stand out. That's where that courage
But people are afraid to do that.
Right, because we're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of judgment. We're afraid of,
And people being actually culturally ostracized and shunned if we fail to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I'll say something shocking. I want people to hear this. I have done a lot of work across Canada, giving all kinds of nutrition presentations. I'll never forget this. When I first flew into Toronto, I was picked up by a Palestinian Canadian woman, and she was driving back to Toronto to drop me off the hotel. The first thing out of her mouth was, here in Canada, you don't have to be a particular kind of person to be respected as a Canadian. In America, you have to be a certain kind of person.
That is true.
You have to conform to a certain way of being, a certain way of eating and thinking and acting.
That's true.
To be accepted.
Which is unfortunate because this is the send me you're tired, you're weak. We are the forerunners of that, and yet we've lost track of that. Canada gets it.
Right. There's no freedom in the context of conformity.
Yeah. That's true.
Even in English society, I was mentioning to someone, an English person I know. In English society, you can be eccentric if you do it with style and grace and class. You can be the classic English eccentric. You can't be eccentric in this country and get away with it because people will shun you. They'll put you down.
Yeah, that's true. That's absolutely true. It's weird. There's like a spectrum where you can be a certain bit of eccentric, but you can't be too eccentric, or you have to be incredibly eccentric to another. You know what I mean? Like we only like this person's a little bit quirky, or this person's like Liberace. There's nothing in between.
Yeah, but Liberace get away because a wealthy person was a popular entertainer.
Right.
You can get away with it in the entertainment industry, but not in mainstream America. It's not allowed. In small town mainstream America, it's not allowed.
And that's what's unfortunate is that's what Seattle is built on is an artistic culture and a free culture. When I was when I lived in DC, people would be walking around and we'd be in town and someone would be like, man, look at that person with the nose ring and the mohawk and the this and that. And it's like, man, that's crazy. I'm like, not really. That's my neighbor. That's all of Queen Anne. That's all of Capitol Hill. It was in no way interesting to me at all, right? When I was in DC, everyone, because DC's very straight-laced, it was just kind of like, well, that person's an individual. I'm like, not in Seattle. That person's just a dinner guest. That's not, you know.
Right.
Right.
But it's so true because I mean, back east, New York, DC, and so forth, you have a way of being that requires you socially to conform to a certain way of presenting yourself to the world.
It's absurd. When I went to college and met people from boarding schools and things like that, to the extent where it was almost like gang members, where you can't wear these types of shoes, otherwise we'll be judging for this.
Correct.
Or you can't wear this, or it was even back then, it was just kind of like, are you wearing those pants ironically, or do you actually sail? Like, what? Why does it matter? They look good with these pants, shoes, who cares? I couldn't believe it. And it's because they grew up since children of their parents saying, hey, the Vanderbilts next door are throwing a dinner party. You act like this, you don't do this, you don't say this, you don't do this, because it affects our social standing.
That's exactly right.
Wow, what a struggle for kids.
You have to look and be a certain way. I have a good friend who was, he's a son of a former member of the Maryland Assembly. He was a politician back in Maryland government. He's a well-known property developer and so forth. And of course, he was programmed to, as a child, to act a certain way in front of the press and that kind of thing. Can you imagine the pressure on Donald Trump's children?
Oh, yeah.
To be a certain way, to act a certain way. I mean, you couldn't pay me to be in that situation.
You know, although I will say this, and this is not a political statement at all. This is just, I think, because Donald Trump is in the same way of more entertainer, just very recently politician. He's really been more on the entertainment spectrum. As a comedian, I take offense where Donald Trump Jr. was at a comedy show being a complete nuisance and a jerk, and some crowd member decked him or hit him with a bottle or something like that. Something inappropriate, something that they shouldn't have
totally
done.
Inappropriate.
But it was so obnoxious that everyone in the crowd was just kind of like, that was the right response, because this person's ruining a night for 200 other people. What makes them so special? And then they found out later it was Donald Trump's son, way before any of this. I just thought that was hilarious that Donald's first response is, let's go sue, until they realized this is great publicity. So now you can kind of prop your son up and show the stitches and be like, see, everyone's against us. It's like, well, no, now you look like the hero for doing something horrible. You know, you did something awful, and now you look like you look like the victim. Yeah.
But think about what you're saying, that we're talking about not believing what you're told and so forth. That's how easy you can spin something any way you want to.
Right. You can spin it any way you want. Yeah.
Right. So people have to be willing to actually look through all the media hype, look through all the statements, see what is really true.
Well, the clickbait, that's how big clickbait is now. Is they found something like 70% of people don't even read the articles; they just immediately share them on Facebook and just split them out. And I've read articles that say one thing, and then the result is completely different, and it's infuriating. Right. In fact, in our industry, here's one. There was a study that basically the headline said, "Echinacea does not cure the common cold and flu." Okay, so from you and I, from our perspective, we're like, yeah, of course, nothing cures the common cold. It's like saying there's no cure for penguins. You know, it's living organisms that just exist, right? Is echinaceas in Europe is widely accepted to bolster the body's immunity to then fight off the illness itself. Right. So I read the entire article. I was like, wait a minute, this article confirms that. And confirms these multiple studies and confirms this, but then the headline was super sensational. It was totally incongruous to what the actual article was. And then I watched all these people passing it along on social media. And luckily I had read the article previous. So when people were like, clearly none of you are reading the article, because everyone's like, I told my sister echinacea doesn't work. I'm like, read the article. The article just refuted your exact statement.
But
blew
Jeremy,
my mind.
You have to do the same thing with scientific papers. You have to read the detail because you're not going to get the full picture and see what's there.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. I read thousands and thousands of journal articles. You see how studies are misstructured, like you're using the wrong dosage for a particular nutrient or for too short of a period of time.
Drives me crazy.
I mean, the people designing studies don't know what they're doing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And you end up with the wrong impression.
Yeah. People show me studies where they go, did you see that this just discredited this particular nutrient? And then I read the articles like, this is a synthetic form of that nutrient. Some company just made this in a lab, tried to sell it to us as fraud, and it didn't work. And so now they can look like the heroes who discovered it. No, they're the ones that tried to create it and dump it on us in the first place.
There's even a problem in the scientific community. The scientific community is not pure because scientists get their reputations built on what's happened in the past. And that's why every generation has to come up with a new paradigm, and the old guys and gals have to die off before the new paradigm takes its rightful place.
Right.
I'll give an example. I knew someone who was at He was an up-and-coming expert on freshwater algae, did research in the Great Lakes, and then was doing research in the Chesapeake Bay. And he was a researcher at my old alma mater, John Hopkins University. I know people at JHU are not going to want to hear this, but I'll say it. So he was coming up with new ideas about how freshwater algae behave and wanted to publish papers on this. And his supervisor there at JHU blocked the publication of those papers.
Yeah.
Blocked it because it was contrary to what the old paradigm was expressing.
Right.
And this guy got so furious, the young man got so furious, he left the field of science and went to St. John's College in Annapolis to teach philosophy.
Yeah.
It was so infuriating. A young scientist just ended his career because he found such dishonesty among his senior colleagues.
Yeah.
This happens all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's who's going to pay. Well, so that's actually interesting. That kind of leads us to the next. I mean, we always talk about you just got to follow the paper trail, but that leads to the next thing. That's the purpose of this podcast. How do we change that? How do we get people to start not responding emotionally to here's what I believe? Like they do this every 4 years. They do this for every political cycle where the journalist goes out and says, "Who are you supporting?" And we'll use Trump and Hillary because that's what's going on right now. And they go, "I support Hillary Clinton." Well, do you support this policy? Yes. Do you support this policy? Yes. Do you support this policy? Yes. Well, those are all Trump's policies. Does that change your opinion on Hillary Clinton? Nope. People have already made no matter how many facts you throw at people have already established their perceptions. So what I do is all I do is change people's perceptions. It's just like these people that I'm like, listen, my family's Asian. You're from the Mediterranean, right? You know better. This is not me saying like, oh yeah, here's a different way of doing this. You lived this way for 40 years. Why did you change that? Just because everybody else around you did, you know? And I have to show that mirror right back to them, right? So as a comment, you can ask any comedian in the country, and it's going to be the same answer. The most infuriating, it's the type of thing that if this one thing could go away, it would make every comedian's lives a lot easier and a lot happier, is anytime you're in a social setting, and a lot of comedians have anxiety anyway, you're in a social setting and people find out you're a comedian, what do you think the first thing they say is?
What?
Tell me a joke.
Oh, yes.
It's the most ignorant, senseless, stupid. No. It's just the most you know what I mean? It's just and it's also that person's way of saying I'm an idiot. You know what I mean? Like it's just that person's way of trying to engage, but not realizing like now you're basically demanding that I entertain you, exactly. which is my job. This right now, I'm off hours, right?
Right.
And so there's no good answer, because if you answer angry, like leave me alone, you look like a jerk. People are like, that guy's not funny. He's a jerk. If you answer silly, that person's going to want to keep engaging you silly. So there's no win. There's absolutely no win. Right?
They don't realize that comedy is one of the most difficult things to pull off. It's always, there's a context around it. A comedian builds a context, and then come the jokes and so forth. You just can't come up with a joke right off the spot and make people laugh.
I'm glad you mentioned that. You nailed it. That's exactly what happens, is that when you're talking to somebody, people say, oh, I've always thought about doing comedy. I can do comedy. That person I can tell is a dum-dum, is because they don't realize how to, when I talk to people, like, man, that's what a difficult thing, because they realize how much writing and work and technical.
Exactly.
It's the same as like meeting Alicia Keys and being like, I can do what she does. No, you can't.
No, you can't.
You know what I mean? Do you currently play for your church organ? Do you currently play in a band? Then how do you even conceive that you can't?
People don't get it. They don't get it at all.
They don't get it at all. And so people are like, it's infuriating going to social settings and people because they want to talk about them and how they would be good at comedy. And I'm like, this is not a topic I want to discuss at all.
The old classic comedians like Sid Caesar or Jack Benny and so forth. Those guys and gals, George Burns and Gracie Allen, they worked out their routines over many, many years in vaudeville till they got down to a fine science.
To a T.
They knew exactly what was going to make an audience laugh.
To a T.
Because they tried it with audience after audience after audience all across the country.
Right.
So they refined it and got better and better and better. That's why they were so great.
Right.
It took years to get to that point.
Yeah. Those knives had been sharpened and
you
sharpened.
You better believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about Sid Caesar. Think about the writers he had on the Sid Caesar show.
Yeah, tons.
He had Carl Reiner, who's still alive at age 94. Can you believe that? Carl Reiner's still alive?
He's the best.
And Woody Allen was also writing that show.
Oh, was he really?
Yes.
Oh, man.
For Sid Caesar.
That's fantastic.
I mean, they had brilliance on that show.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it just takes a lot of effort. I mean, it's one.
That's a team of geniuses. To make him look good.
Well, right.
So much work.
The same with all these guys on the Daily Show, all the writers there on
There's
all
like
these
20,
shows.
30 writers. Always.
Yes.
Shows. Yep.
You got all these writers back there who are coming up with great ideas. So this is not. And the one guy goes out there and presents it, but a whole bunch of brilliant minds were behind that.
But that's why it looks easy. It's just like any sort of athlete, and you see them make a play, and someone's like, "Oh, he should have gotten both feet in bounds." I'm like, "Did you see the feat of nature that guy just did just to catch that ball?"
They don't get it.
And yeah, exactly.
I can't stand armchair quarterbacks.
Armchair quarterbacks
who've
drive me nuts.
never done it.
Yeah. They drive me
When
bonkers.
you have done this, that level of excellence, then you can criticize.
You know, that's funny. That you bring up a good point. Like we talk about how people make their decisions emotionally and then justify them rationally.
Exactly.
Every sociology study shows that that's what we do, and then we try to justify it later because we're afraid of being like, I was wrong. I made a dumb mistake. I shouldn't have. We don't want to be challenged. I was working with not a Hall of Famer, but he was a Pro Bowl winner. I'm sorry, multiple Pro Bowl player, Super Bowl champion, right? So a high figure. It's most difficult enough being in the NFL, being at that caliber. Other NFL players were like, "Are you his agent? Who are you?" I'm like, "We're just hanging out, right?" And we were, and like he's an armchair quarterback, so we go to this hotel bar because we were just trying to watch whatever game was going on. And sure enough, there's some guy being loud and obnoxious. We would have completely ignored this guy if he wasn't getting in the way of every other person's enjoyment of it, right? And he's going like, "Oh man, this guy should have gone over the middle," blah blah blah. So me with my mouth, I just kind of challenged him, and just the way guys are, just being, you know, blah blah blah. And then the guy kept coming back at me until I was like, well, let's just defer to Pro Bowler and Super Bowl champion right here, right? And he's like, oh man, so great to meet you, blah blah blah. And I was like, so explain why this guy's wrong. And then he immediately tells him, yeah, that's called a fake route. He's actually trying to draw the receiver, and completely mapped out the play. And then the guy began to debate him. And that's when I was like, I'm never talking to another sports fan again. I cannot believe. And I'm joking because I'm a little bit buzzed and I'm being a jerk as usual. And so I was like, wait. So when you were playing in the Super Bowl, how did you know that was a play you wanted to run? He's like, oh no, I played like 2 years of like a community college. And I just put my head in my hands, and him and I was like, let's just go somewhere else and get it.
There's an old saying I learned a long time ago: a fool knows all things except his own ignorance.
Yeah,
and this whole issue. I mean, what you're saying about this guy relative to football, you apply that across the board.
To everything.
There's so many Americans don't want to own the fact that we've made, as a nation, made enormous mistakes.
Oh yeah,
the war in Vietnam, the war in Iraq. We don't own that.
And what makes me upset is when I'm critical, people say you don't love this country, or you're. This the big thing is to attack people for not loving America. I go, no, I'm mad at you because you don't want the country to be better. The reason why I'm criticizing is because we need to be better, so much better.
But think about it. The whole point of criticizing, because look, the most dangerous thing you can do to a drug addict is to give him or her more drugs.
Yeah.
The most dangerous thing to do to a nation that's extremely powerful, but it's going wild and crazy with the power, is to encourage the nation to do more of the same.
It's riling people up.
It doesn't work.
Riling people
you
up.
intervene with people to help them from doing destructive things.
Right.
You do it because you love the person, not because you hate the person.
Exactly.
It's all their egoism, and they're wrapping themselves in the flags.
If you didn't love them, you wouldn't take the time.
Exactly.
So yes, when people say I'm unpatriotic for being critical, I'm like, no, you don't understand. This is why I'm critical, is because here's a good example. My mom is from Korea, right? So back in the late 80s, early 90s, I don't know if you remember, but there was this big campaign of Buy American.
Right.
It was like Buy American clothes, Buy American, keep the jobs here, right? My mom took that incredibly seriously. Do you know what I mean? So people look at my mom, they see her as a Korean or an immigrant. Right. They don't, they might think of her as American second. Not my mom. Why do you think she came here? You know what I mean?
Right.
And so her and I remember Calvin Klein, different companies. I would specifically buy, and the fabric felt better. And I was like, no, this American stuff is good. You know what I mean? So we made a massive effort. So she would talk to all of her friends and stuff like that. Not Korean friends, just friends in general. They could care less. And it's you know what I mean? It's those are the ones that are saying, if you don't love this country, get out. It's like, no, if you love this country, make it better. Let's change some things and make it better.
Well, there's another shocking statistic I heard. Mark Shields said this on the news hour, last year, year before. I mean, I'm a veteran of the Vietnam War, and I can talk about this stuff. Only 7% of the American people have ever worn the uniform of the American military services. Only 7%.
Wow.
All this patriotism, but they will not put their own asses on the line.
Yeah.
They won't do it.
Yeah. That drives me
I
nuts.
was there as an infantry officer in Vietnam.
Yeah.
They were not.
Yeah.
Only 7% of the American people. All this patriotic talk and nothing to back it up.
Oh, that's crazy. You're right. Where were you? Yeah, that's exactly right. Everyone that's got all the things to say, and it's because I noticed,
including George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld, the whole gang,
politicians,
all these so-called conservatives and so forth, they have not been there.
Yeah, politicians saying, "Here's what we need to do." It makes me agitated.
Absolutely.
It's like the old Quiet on the Western Front, where 18-year-old kids are getting massacred, and then the generals are being like, well, what we need to do is we need to move over here and take this territory.
I know.
Really? That's 30 feet away and you're guaranteed to die. How about you join me? How about you come on with me? We'll take this little plot of land that you want. So it's so important. It's just not seeing on the personal level, the ground level, how it really affects us as people.
You don't see it. I mean, we give the credit for George Patton for leading the Third Army to victory in France and so forth in World War II. But no, George Patton didn't win those battles. The men did. The men fought those battles.
Patton, though, was a wild man. Just like any president that we respect.
He was a wild man.
They go completely off what, you know what I mean?
He was a wild man, but he was a finest general in that war in the European theater. No question
what's
about
right.
that.
Yeah. You have to say, I know what you're saying, but I know what's right. And he's one of those wild people that
you know how to
that,
get done. There's no question about that.
You got to get it done. Yeah.
That's right.
Yep.
So just what can I say? But people who have never had the personal experience of this stuff, whether it's in comedy or sports or whatever, they talk all this talk and got no experience to back it up.
And yet they're adamant. That's why it was that moment when I'm sitting there with the Pro Bowl, that moment where I was like, I can never talk to another sports fan again because this tells me what the level of conversation is. It's because this person is adamant that they're right. Right. It blows my mind. As just real quick, I always have to tell people that General MacArthur in Korea is like he's like Martin Luther King or Tupac here. He's just in everybody's house. Like everybody's got that picture of Douglas MacArthur in Korea. To the point where when I was a kid, I'd see that picture everywhere. I thought he was an American president. Right. Just because you see him in every house in Korea, right? But it was the same thing. He's a wild man. He was like, here's what we need to do. Otherwise, you know what I mean? Like, unlike Vietnam, which is kind of vague, in Korea was like, no. It's coming down on us. You know what I mean? We need to set the line fast.
Well, it's back in those days when there were real lines of demarcation between enemy territory and your territory.
Yeah.
That was a much more straightforward thing. With these new wars like Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, you're surrounded by all kinds of people, and you know who's a friendly civilian, who's the enemy. You have no idea.
Mind-numbing.
It's a much more difficult war.
I have several clients of mine that are Vietnam War vets, and they tell me stories, and it blows my mind every time.
My brother's a Vietnam veteran, so am I.
Yeah.
So you are in these situations, and the same thing is going on Iraq and Afghanistan, the same kind of thing.
Because we see the sensationalized Hollywood versions.
Oh, exactly.
We see, when they tell me stories, it's much more... Oh man, I get up in the morning and I pray just because I'm glad I'm still here from all the things that he's seen, It's complete. I'm like, then none of that's glorified. The stories they tell me is I'm very proud of the service that my grandfather's buried in Arlington, right? Yeah. I have so many clients of mine that are veterans, and I see what they actually go through. This country's horrible to veterans. Our military spending goes up and up and up and up, and we do very little for veterans. Very little.
Oh, I know.
And yet every time people say, like, support the troops, that person, I'm like, what are you doing to support the troops? Because I help people with PTSD almost daily. I help people fix their lives daily because I care about veterans. What are you doing to support the troops other than saying it to make yourself look better?
I can tell you right now, I have a good friend who for several years worked in the VA. She was a senior nurse there. I will not mention the particular hospital, but she was horrified by the lack of organization, the lack of support.
Sad.
Even after all this, the publicly discussed issues around the VA not serving the needs of veterans in the hospital setting and so forth, she found so much incompetence in this organization among the people supposed to be providing care.
That's what my veterans tell me.
All this obstacles to providing health care for veterans.
They restrict it. They make it more complicated.
It's crazy.
It's the opposite to support the troops. They make it difficult for the troops to get the help they need. Yeah, and so that's where I got that perspective. Is every time you hear someone be like, support the troops, it's all my veterans always kind of roll their eyes and be like,
well,
the first thing to
do to support the troops is not to put them in a war that shouldn't be fought. It's the first thing to do.
Yeah.
Secondly, if they are involved in the war, take care of them after the war is over.
That's to me all that matters.
Take care of the emotional wounds as well as the physical wounds.
And that's the thing. I know a lot of people that work with Wounded Warrior. It's a wonderful project, right?
Yes.
But it's also it's easy if you see someone that's lost a limb or lost their eyesight or lost their hearing or lost something, then it's very easy to be sympathetic. When you see someone that's happily married in a situation, it's easy for people to just go, yeah, well, they're fine. No. They live through nightmares, Correct. All sorts of horrors that you don't see. There's just nothing outward that you can see.
You don't see the inner wounds.
We don't see the inner wounds, and we do very little to help that. So there's nothing there. There's nothing from the VA. There's not an organization. Those people are just left in the middle, and that's the vast majority of our soldiers, of our troops.
And it's sad because you know of ways in natural medicine we can help these people.
Tons.
There's so many different ways we can do it, and it doesn't involve the use of very expensive pharmaceutical drugs. There are many other ways to get the PTSD addressed. So I don't know what to say anymore. You see the disparity between what is said in our society and what is actually done. They say one thing, they do just the opposite.
That's the problem.
And this tendency to keep on doing more and more of the same thing, expect to get for different results.
Right.
Stop doing what is not working. Start doing more of what does work. Find out what really works and do that.
You know what I found? Americans in general and people is we do like the fact that our businesses are stand up, where we're used to trusting businesses, right? And having a relationship of trust. And so Americans do not like being weaseled, right? So when you and I were talking, how customers of mine will have these belief systems and have these things set up where they say, I think this or I say that. And I go, actually, did you ever read the back of the bottle? Look at the dose. Look at the price. They're like, I go, you've been paying $5 more a month. How long you been doing this? 6 months. You've been paying $5 too much a month for 6 months. How you feel now? Then it's funny. Then they change their perspective. So they'll argue with me or they'll give me reasons or justifications. But then I was like, wait. You've been paying more money for less in the bottle for the last 6 months. What do you say about that? That's when they take my side. That's when like, oh, now I see what you mean.
You have to wake up and smell the coffee. Look at what's 2008. That was the big red flag. I mean, they were believing in, we have to believe what the guys on Wall Street are saying and so forth. No, we don't, because they don't know what they're doing. First of all, they're incompetent, and they're also corrupt. Look at Wells Fargo. I mean, can you imagine making up all these false accounts for your own customers?
Yeah.
I mean,
unconscionable. I don't know why anybody would have a Wells Fargo account. I mean, I just don't. I closed mine out a year ago and actually won a lawsuit against them. And every time I have clients and friends that come to me all the time complaining about Wells Fargo did, and I go, I closed my account 10 years ago and sued them and won. You know what I mean? I don't know why you're complaining. I tell them generally, as somebody that cares about you, stop complaining. You either shut down your account or you
There's
don't
more
complain.
to it than that. I had a banking executive tell me a few years ago. I was in Toronto. Told me a few years ago, his job as a banking executive was to find ways to cheat other banks.
Yeah, it's his job.
So every bank has thousands of transactions every day with other banks. So they tack on extra fees for all those transactions. And they know that most of them will not be caught by the accountants.
They're going to get
so
it
they
somewhere.
get extra money. So the banks are robbing each other.
Yeah, each other. Yeah,
the executives lie to each other, and the banks are robbing each other. The banks are totally untrustworthy.
Yeah.
That's why I'm involved with my own trading and investing, and so I do it myself because you can't trust institutions. They will. I'll give an example. My friend Dennis got me into this.
It's the old other people's money.
Other people's money. So his mother has a certain amount of money at a particular bank. I will not mention the name. And Dennis saw one of the statements, and he found that they were making 40% per year on what his mother had left with it. 40% a year. They gave her 5%. They kept the 40%. She's taking all the risk.
All the risk. Yep.
And they're taking all the profit.
All the people.
And leaving her with peanuts.
It's other people's money.
This is it.
Yep.
The guys and gals on Wall Street are getting rich off other people's money and give the people who invest very little in return for it.
Well, yeah, that's a perfect example. When you show people that, that's when people that would argue with me, suddenly I go, do you know this company's been ripping you off for 6 months? Suddenly like, yeah, then they take my side. So the same thing is like, did you know they've been ripping you off? Wait a minute. Then they go after. So it's not my job to rile you up. My job is to simply say, if you're okay with getting ripped off, that's fine, but don't complain, right? But if now that you know you're getting ripped off, how you feel now?
How you feel now?
That's when people.
What can you do now to take your own economic future into your hands and move forward with it?
Economic, health, in every category, well-being.
Right.
That's all I've done for 15 years. And you for longer is all I've ever done is day in and day out is change people's perceptions. People come in with certain ideas. Right. People come in and say, I don't believe in homeopathy. I'm like, okay, I don't believe in tree fairies. What are you talking about? What is this conversation? What if I said, I don't believe in maple trees? Well, there's a maple tree right there. So what was the point of this conversation? Are we just arguing? Everybody nowadays doesn't want to base anything on facts. We want to base it on, and we want to shove each other's opinions down each other's throats, not come from a fact-based system. So one way is that instead of challenging or talking down to people or just being like, why don't you see this? Maybe they don't see it. I have friends of mine that I tried to get off of Diet Coke, and no matter how many studies, I go, I'm just doing this because I care about you. And then I just frame it a particular way that 2 months later they go, I haven't drank Diet Coke in 2 months. Whereas because something I said finally clicked where they're like, oh, I don't care for that. I was like, how many people do you see drink Coke, just Coca-Cola, right? How many people do you see pound like 6 Cokes a day? Not a lot. People pound 6 Diet Cokes a day. Yeah. I go, there's something insidious about that, where it's tough to plow down 6 Coca-Colas, but you can plow down 6 Diet Cokes. Does that make sense to you? That's what changed her mind. You know what I mean? Right. So she didn't care about the aspirin. She didn't care about the synthetic. She didn't care about the studies on nerve damage. That was the one that got her, you know what I mean?
Right.
So what you have to frame it to people the way they see, oh, I see, that does make sense. So that is different. And one way that I know that for a fact you have a distinct role in kind of changing those perceptions is your book, the Healing Power of Flax, right? Mm-hmm, right. Just like I was talking with about how comedians, if anytime you meet a comedian, do everybody a favor, don't say, tell me a joke. You know what I mean? Just don't do that. It'll make everybody's lives easier. Same misperception is something that if I could never have this conversation again would make everybody's life so much easier, is everyone saying that fish oil is better than flax, right?
Right.
Without knowing the full background. And it's not their fault. It's because if you get handed 20 articles that say, like just like the echinacea one, that incorrectly misinterpret facts and kind of jimmy things around and say fish oil is better, then people are going to believe that. You're not going to believe the 21st that says the contrary one. And also, when I tell people that see that, I go, just so we're clear, we're not going to discuss things in terms of better or better than, because that's like saying blueberries are better than raspberries. Right. There's no better and. There's different things going on in different mechanisms, and then here are the mechanisms. And then I show them, and then they go, oh, I get it, because now I presented them actual facts that they can take in. So I always have to explain to people about ALA and how the body actually breaks things down. So I would love it if once and for all you break it down practical, so that you can tell anybody can listen to this clip and say, this is what I've been trying to tell you for years. This is what I've been trying.
You want to do that right now?
Let's do it right now.
It's very simple. I mean, all omega-3 fatty acids on the planet originate as from plant material, ALA, alpha-linolenic acid, that you find in green vegetation. It all starts from there. So all the EPA that we find in animals, whether it's animals in this ocean, they got it from phytoplankton at the bottom of the food chain in the ocean, or land animals, whether they're wild animals, wild game that you hunt, or animals raised on grass. All that comes from the alpha-linolenic acid that you find in green vegetation. Where is that found? The chlorophyll in green plants is located in what chambers called chloroplasts. And the membranes around the chloroplasts contain ALA. So your animals will take that in, then the ALA will be converted into EPA and DHA. Land animals, ocean animals, is the same thing. So everything comes from ALA. And now we're finding, it's amazing, the research, attacking flax oil has not been good enough. Well, now going back to doing these meta-analyses, they're finding that ALA can do some things that flax oil cannot, that fish oil cannot. For example, we now find that ALA from flax oil can actually reduce prostate cancer risk in a way superior to EPA and DHA. It can do something that EPA and DHA cannot do. And there's a number of other studies that are showing that. So all this attack on flax oil and ALA was purely for commercial reasons. Mm-hmm. The fish oil people, instead of talking about the wonderful things that fish oil can do, attack flax oil and ALA just for commercial reasons, and had no real scientific basis for it, or had false science. There was some false study that came out back in 2000 saying that ALA increased prostate cancer risk. Yeah. Flax oil was never involved with that at all. And then the study was specious, and now
totally disproven.
Your own tax dollars pay for a National Institute of Health study showing that no source of ALA, whether it's flax oil or any other source, increased any prostate health problems. Yeah. On top of that, and now just a couple of years ago, a meta-analysis actually said ALA has more influence in reducing prostate cancer risk than EPA and DHA.
The opposite is true.
Just the opposite is true.
Yep.
So you can't. There's an old saying that I learned from an old man back in the 70s. The lie rides a swift horse, the truth rides a mule. You always wait until all the evidence is in. Mm-hmm. And you must not just read headlines, read in detail. You must not be a dilettante when it comes to knowledge. You must be a scholar. I'm a scholar by nature. Yeah. I dig into the facts. Right. So get your little limited, narrow mind out of the way and do some rigorous intellectual work. But unfortunately, we live in a country that's intellectually lazy. Yeah. So people don't want to do that. Yeah. So you have to dig and dig and dig. And I include journalists in this. Sure. We have no real medical journalists in the United States. Why? Because if they ever challenge the medical establishment, they would no longer have access to the scientists.
And
the sponsorship is gone. So they have to, they're medical
access.
stenographers. They simply copy down what the physicians and scientists are saying and then report that to the public as being gospel.
Yeah.
And quite often it isn't.
And you know what? It's sometimes even like we know, even in light of the facts, people will still maintain things. So that's why I constantly try to shift things. And that's a perfect example. I'm glad you mentioned that, is that when people would come in and say, hey, I read that omega fatty acids are bad for prostate cancer, because they just get the snapshot. They just get the headline. They just get the top frame. And I show them, and I would show them published studies, and I go, no, this was completely refuted. As a matter of fact, our own taxpayer dollars went into defrauding us and lying to us. How does that make you feel? That your taxpayer dollars went to go lie to you? Now they're so they came in kind of distrustful, being like, man, I haven't taken my fish oil for a while or my flax oil for a while because of this. And so instead, they're still going, they're asking me for validation. They're kind of like, is that the right thing? And I go, I tell you what, when I show them that and I go, you just paid tax money to get lied to. How do you feel about that? Like, nope, back on my flax tomorrow. So, you know what I mean? So I didn't have to convince them. I didn't have to give them some song and dance. It's reframing things where people saying, oh, I cannot believe I fell for it. I'm like, don't feel bad. We all fall for it, because how are we supposed to know any better? If the facts aren't clearly presented to us,
Absolutely.
How are we ever supposed to know? So it's trying to get the majority of us who are busy with our lives, busy with our time, busy with things in our lives that can't do the constructive digging. That's why you're such a valuable resource. Why I've been lucky enough to be a resource for people is because people trust me enough to come to me. So I take that burden very seriously.
But Jeremy, the shame of the thing is that our news media, whether it's the general news media or the media that specializes in healthcare and so forth, it's a shame that they are so dependent on the establishment. All they do is regurgitate what the guys and gals at the top are saying.
Yeah.
They never delve into the real truth of the matter, to challenge what the guys and gals at the top are saying and doing, to find what the real truth is about any matter. So we're not getting, you just can't trust them. I don't care if it's the Wall Street Journal or any of these typical news reports you see on TV, on radio. You cannot believe what they're saying.
Yeah. There's no Edward R. Murrows. There's nobody shaking their fist at the system.
No.
They're with this, working within the system.
They're part of the problem and not part of the solution.
Yeah.
So you have to really dig and dig and dig to find the truth, whether it's in the scientific community, whether it's in finance, in every aspect of life. You cannot believe what you're being told.
I think that's the biggest point, though, is like you said, unfortunately, because media, journalism, and for everything is so misleading that we have to dig further and further and further than we ever had before. And ironically, we live in an age where we have the most information available to us than we ever have. We have right now with the internet, the first time in human history, we have every piece of knowledge that man's ever, ever assembled.
And you can have access to it anywhere in the world as long as you have some kind of hookup to the internet.
Yeah, you have access to the accumulation of mankind's collective knowledge.
Correct.
And yet it's so much easier to be swindled now than ever before.
Right.
It's crazy.
And you cannot be lazy. If you really want to know something, you must dig for the facts. And and this is something else that people got to get out. They have to have the intellectual discipline and honesty to explore different points of view. You must not, if you're conservative, you must not listen to just Fox News and Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
You must seek out other points of view.
Yeah.
Liberals must listen to conservatives.
Yep.
Conservatives must listen to liberals. People with different points of view have something of value to teach you.
Yeah. I read an article that a white journalist wrote that said, I'm a racist and I'm sorry, to teach me how not to be.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty jarring title. I'm like, man, I wonder if this person grew up in a KKK environment, or maybe in a very, damaged environment. But here's the thing, it didn't. He said, I'm just a normal, typical white American. The basic decisions I was making and things that I was having, I did not know had this effect on my black friends.
Exactly.
And the article was very illuminating. He was saying, like, I didn't know the things I wasn't intentionally out of hate or out of.
And that's what Tim Wise, who's this nation's top speaker on the subject, talks about. We are inadvertently doing these things.
Yeah.
The problem is, now even James Baldwin realized this years ago, that even African Americans are culturally conditioned against their own highest and best long-term interests. They think they're less than because they've been programmed to think they're less than.
Yeah, those studies that they've done for years about how classrooms didn't realize that they treated boys and girls differently.
Right.
They didn't realize, and every teacher in the country, in America, did it, and it was all socialized. We just didn't know, and then it wasn't the teachers being bad. It was just that's the way our system was designed. Right. Where a young boy raises his hand, a young girl raises her hand to ask questions. Like he's like. No, Kimberly, that's the wrong answer. And then a young boy asks a question, and it's like, no, Jeff, that's the wrong answer, but good try. Why didn't she get the good try?
Exactly.
It's so subtle and so, but you don't realize what impact that had on young women. You know what I mean? It's because, well, it's a math class and women aren't good at math. And so teachers didn't know they were doing it until they ran these studies, and teachers, and they're good-hearted people, were going, oh my God, I've been doing that for 30 years. I didn't even realize. It's so ingrained.
But see, now things are changing. Well, I mean, I think most of the valedictorians coming out of high school in this country are female now.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, and graduates.
So things have really changed in this country.
Right.
But there's just so much that people have to contend with. It's not just the fact that they're living their life. We're so inundated with all kinds of media hype, the commercials, the commercially controlled journalism. I mean, there's so much of this nonsense and misinformation that people don't know what to believe anymore.
I saw this. Man, I forgot what it was for, but he was. Might have been a MacArthur Scholarship winner, a Rhodes Scholar, some achievement, right? And so he said, as an African American, I was told by one of my friends, professors, somebody that in a mentor, he's like, as a young black man, you have to be twice as good as the next black man. Is because as you achieve more, the more people are going to say like, well, it's just affirmative action, or he's just got that because of this, or just got back to this. Whereas if you are so far superior to all of your competitors, nobody says that anymore. What a burden. What a massive burden. That's like telling a young athlete, you have to be better than the next guy's best player. Right. Otherwise, you're just average. That's what it takes to be. Yeah. So we don't see that perspective.
Women were saying that when the women's liberation movement really took hold and we started getting female executives back in the 70s. They were saying they realized they had to be twice as good as the average man just to be accepted as good enough to be in the executive suite. Just to be there. Yeah. Right, so this is typical of the situation. You always have the extra burden.
You know, I had forgotten. I mean, we've talked about it because you and I, when we talk about Baltimore. We talk about where we grew up and things like that. So it's funny, like we never get into these types of super deep intellectual conversations. This is exciting, but I had forgotten that your degree from John Hopkins originally was in physics.
Physics and math, correct?
Yeah. Do you still engage a lot and see all the things changing right now? I mean. You keep up with physics and what's happening in the world?
The basic concept, yes, and it's amazing. It makes me feel more comfortable with the whole concept of energy medicine. I think that's the one. It's
finally validating what you believe.
It's still being fought tooth and nail by the conventional establishment. Yeah. I think energy medicine is going to be the way of the future because it's a medicine that is inexpensive. It's very deep acting with very few side effects as properly applied. But it's something even my naturopathic colleagues are not willing to fully embrace.
Yeah, I could be wrong on the facts on this, but exactly. Even your own colleagues. There was Nova did a thing, and I wish I would have taped it. But it was some symposium of the top minds in quantum physics and this and that, and I think it was Stanford. Some scientists proposed a study and then looked at empirically. Other scientists and physicists were looking at it and being like, yeah, this is all legit. This is all the math, all the work adds up. What is this proving? They said, proves the power of prayer. And they're like, bunch of garbage.
Yeah, right.
You just said everything lines up until we said what the study was.
Exactly
and
right.
It blew my mind.
Exactly.
And everyone that saw that interview that believes in prayer was like, yeah, there you go. Anyone that doesn't believe in prayer was just kind of like, yeah. So no matter what opinion you had, those facts didn't change anything. You still had the same ideas you had before.
One of my distinguished colleagues, Dr. Leanna Standish, who used to be the head of research at Bastyr University, actually did a study. And she did, I think it was done with MRI scans. She actually did a scan where you actually do the basic scan of a person while this under ordinary circumstances. And then you do a scan when the person is being prayed for and sent positive healing intentions by other people. It lights up the scan. Something, the energy of that person shifts.
There's something there.
There's something there.
And what's difficult is that it was not very long ago. I mean, it was essentially in our lifetime. It's just a generation away that if you said there was anything smaller than an atom, you were a moron. You were laughed at by. You were a complete jokester.
Oh, I know.
Then we split the atom, and there's quarks and quantum particles and all these other things.
You can't keep track of it.
Exactly. So the same way with that type of quantum medicine and things like that. Whenever people say, "Oh, you and your voodoo nonsense," I'm like, "But what if 10 years from now we crack this atom? Do I get to say I told you so?" You know what I mean? Like, why would you not want to believe that in the best way possible?
Today's heresy is tomorrow's dogma. That's just the way it is. I mean, people. The problem. There's a major blind spot in science. I hate to say it, and I've been in the scientific field all my life, in the physical science and biological sciences. The blind spot of science is the fact that science will not accept something unless it can be measured and quantified. In fact, I had a brilliant scientist, Dr. Baronoff, used to work for the Penta Water Company, who actually said this guy was a PhD in biophysics and a master's degree in physical chemistry. a brilliant Russian scientist, who said that. Unless it can be measured and quantified, a scientist will not accept its existence. Now think about this. Think about all the radio waves coming out of star systems since the Big Bang. But until a scientist can measure it, he or she would not accept the fact that such energy exists in the universe. So this is the blind spot of science. Unless it can be quantified and measured and so forth, as far as the science is concerned, it does not exist. But there's so many things that exist that at this point cannot be measured with human instrumentation.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Right.
So that's science's blind spot.
Yes, and never acknowledges.
It's an enormous blind spot.
We kill people by the thousand for saying the world is round, and then one day suddenly everyone's like, "Oh yeah, it's round." Well, wait a minute.
And now all of a sudden becomes
you can't
accepted.
just flip. Yeah, you can't just flip like that. You spent your whole life
And
killing
they never
people.
will own the damage of
never
the
own the
people
damage.
who was slapped down for saying the world is round.
That's what saddens me, is that people never have to take accountability for the damage they've done. They're like,
Exactly.
"What can I tell you? I was wrong." Well, people suffered because you were wrong, and you have to
Exactly.
take that in. Yeah.
Yeah, Galileo was tortured into recanting
Yeah.
his own
Yeah.
by the Catholic Church.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we have to realize this happens. I mean, the church would actually burn people at stake, but in the scientific community, we actually engage in character assassination.
Yeah.
We destroy people's careers, like the
Right.
guy who was the freshwater algae expert and so
Yeah,
forth.
yeah.
We see it all the time. So this is a problem in the scientific community, especially, and also in the spiritual community. We need a way of bringing science and spirituality back together.
100%. Yeah, that's the key.
I mean, we need a theology that's big enough to embrace everything that Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about.
Sure,
Give me
yeah.
a theology as big as the cosmos.
Right. Exactly.
And of course, it's not going to be something you can write down in a book that was written thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
So we need a theology that big, a new theology that embraces all the cosmos as we know it today.
It's that simple. Why would you not want to expand and grow as human beings as a society? What's Reagan's famous quote? The person that agrees with you 90% of the time is not your enemy. Right? We try to find the 10% that we can squabble on.
I know.
Whereas the 90% we all agree on, just be better to each other, try harder, love each
Exactly.
other, kiss your kids. You know what I mean? Like touch someone else's life. It's simple, very easy, and yet it's so hard for most of us.
This gets
to just do.
controversial. Solomon Rushdie, the guy who wrote that controversial book, Satanic Verses, he was interviewed by Bill Moyers a few years ago. He actually made this statement. It's only in the area of religion that we allow the past to dominate the present.
Yeah.
In no other area do we want something from the past unless it's been proven to be worked today. Now, we want the most modern, up-to-date thing. In medicine and healthcare and everything, we want the most modern, up-to-date thing.
Oh, right.
It's only in religion that we go back to the past and say that way of thinking will dominate today's way of being.
Right.
Only there do we do it.
Yeah.
Why?
And we get so caught up with these are the way things are. So whenever we joke with people about white Jesus versus black Jesus as comics,
Right.
we always joke about that type of thing. It was like,
Exactly.
well, at that period of time, everybody's brown in that area, right? So how is Jesus white? You know,
can't
It's just-
be.
right?
Right.
And so also the Bible itself says that when Jesus comes back, it's going to be a massive surprise to everybody.
Right.
So one of my favorite comedians is a local comic named Sung Lam, who's a good friend of ours and one of our best. And he said, well, what if he comes back and he's Chinese?
Right.
You know what I mean? There you go. The Bible just answered itself. He's like, that's Chineses, right? He's
Right.
like, ha, I fooled you all. I'm Chinese.
Right.
No, I'm not black or white.
Right.
Right. And that's what the Bible said. Whatever you're expecting, it ain't going to be that.
It's not gonna be that.
And yet people fall on their swords for these ideas or these pictures or these notions. And I'm like,
totally crazy.
I was like, what if Jesus comes back and he's a lady? The Bible
I
just said it
know.
could be anything. It could be, you know what I
I
mean?
know.
Embrace that. The Bible just told you that's what it's gonna
It's
be.
all
Right?
mental programming.
Yeah.
And that's why what Christian Murray was saying is so absolutely right. You must realize the extent to which your mind's been programmed to believe things that aren't true.
Right.
And so much of so many cultures is exactly that way.
Exactly.
We're programmed to believe things that aren't true. The universe does not operate that way.
Right,
I spent
right.
my whole life trying to have the universe tell me how it operates.
Right.
Give me a cosmic truth, and I will go with that. So I'm
Right.
digging and digging and digging to find closer and closer ways of being relative to how the universe really operates.
What have you found? If you could give people one truth, what would you say?
It's always deeper than you think.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love it. It's always deeper than you think.
It's always deeper than you think.
It's
I mean,
great.
I was giving a presentation over in Coeur d'Alene a couple of years ago, and it's this guy. I had known this statement before, but the guy actually just reinforced in my mind. The major obstacle to truth is a certainty that you already have it.
Oh yeah. If you got all the answers, why even bother? You clearly have all the answers.
When you think you have all the answers, you're just playing a fool's game.
Yeah.
You're only fooling yourself.
Yeah. This has been fun. It's always fun talking to you. It's been a blast. I could not have asked for more for our first episode. It's exactly what I wanted. You
My
have fun?
pleasure.
Yeah?
Thank you so much. It
Yeah.
was a real privilege.
That's great. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
The best.
Take care.
Hey, that was Dr. Herb Joiner-Bey joining us up at the Treetop Tavern in an undisclosed location deep within the woods of the Pacific Northwest at our studio. We hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, he's a free thinker. He's a voice worth listening to, and we'll be having him back. So definitely email us any questions you might have that the Dr. Herb might be able to answer, and we'll get on the next episode when we bring him back. We'll have him answer some of those questions in addition to an entirely new topic. We'll give him a more specific topic next time. This is just a fun way to introduce ourselves and him to the audience. And I thought he said something interesting. A quote by Ashley Brilliant: "The greatest obstacle to discovering the truth is being convinced that you already know it." I think that encapsulates exactly what we are and what we're trying to do. Is people come into discussions with their minds already made, and at which point it's not a discussion. It's just people throwing their opinions about. So if you're already convinced you have all the answers and you're the smartest person in the room, well, there's no reason even discussing with you. Free thinkers and people that actually are higher minded and trying to answer these bigger questions are always open to new ideas, because it's new ideas that help the little ones grow. And also, thank you to our sponsor. Amino Complete RX is one of my favorite products and something I give absolutely everyone. Almost everyone that I know is just trying to get their lives back in order. We're all strung out. We're all over the place, and it's something I do give people as a baseline just to get themselves back in check and get their system going again. So thank you so much for listening. We have another exciting guest next week, and thank you so much. We can't tell you how much we appreciate it, and we'll be hearing from us again. That's Number Way.